Welcome, everybody. We're going to start today because we have so much to cover. This is such a big topic, and when I was preparing the source sheet, some of you have probably printed out the source sheets. As I was going through it, I said, basically, we've got about a 10-week course here that I'm going to try to squeeze all into an hour, right? But maybe we'll whet your appetite and we'll set up a course on dealing with understanding current events and the situation in Israel from a Torah point of view, because what we can learn by accessing our understanding of the Torah and who the players were in the beginning, we can understand what's going on in current events and current history, and it's a fabulous thing. So we're going to have a taste of that today. Now, the big news that we're talking about is the peace agreement. The peace agreement with our United Arab Emirates friends. And I know a lot of you are here. It's very interesting. We have a mixed group here. We have a mixed group of all supporters of Israel. I think there might be some new people that are trollers here. I don't know. But I think everybody here is a proud supporter of Israel. But we are a mixed group here. We have some very staunch, loyal Orthodox Jews that know a lot, and we have a lot of Christians and people that are everywhere in between, everybody learning and want to understand better. And there's a very interesting argument. Some people think this is a horrible thing. How many think it's like, what are you doing? Why are you making this deal and giving up your rights to annex the biblical homeland? It's the biblical homeland, right? We're talking of places like Hebron, where the patriarchs are buried. How can you give that up? God promised you the land. So any deal that sort of smacks of giving away land, how can you do that? On the other hand, people think it's great. It's peace. We don't want people to die. So we got this conflict, and it's a little bit confusing. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to navigate it. So I'm going to jump quickly to our shared screen. And we're going to take a look at our sources and background information. Just going to switch this out this way. All right. Here we go. This is what happened this week. Here we are, Israel, over here. Here we go. This is what happened this week. Here we are, Israel, over here. Little country. Here's the United Emirates, Arab Emirates over here. Little group of countries. And we made this peace deal. Now, what's very interesting is you probably heard it on the news, maybe on a cable channel, saw something in the newspaper. I thought it would be useful to take a look at the official statement. This is an official joint statement in English that was released. President Trump, Netanyahu, and Sheikh bin Zayed. And they announced and agreed to full normalization of relations between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. Okay. They're going to have agreements regarding investment, tourism, direct flights, security, telecommunications, technology, energy, healthcare, culture, environment, COVID, research, embassies swapped. Now, here's the key point that got everybody, or may get some people, upset. Let's take a look. At the request of President Trump, with the support of the Emirates, Israel will suspend declaring sovereignty over areas outlined in President's vision for peace, right? That was Trump's plan of the century, and focus its efforts now on expanding ties in other countries in Arab and the Muslim world. And we just heard Saudi Arabia is allowing Israel to fly over Saudi Arabia. So now the direct flight will be a direct flight, because imagine if you have negotiations, now we can fly there direct and you have to go all the way down here and around and around and around. That would have been horrible. But now you can go straight over like this. And actually, they just linked up the landline. So I actually heard a transcript of a recording of a Ministry of Israel phone call direct from Israel, which we're area code 972, to the Emirates, which is 971. So they had phone calls as of today. All right. Now, in any of these agreements, I've been around for a while, since Oslo, and you know, with UN agreements, declarations, the language is so accommodating somehow to both sides, so both sides can read things into it and have their own wiggle room for interpretation. That's what happens and causes some problems. So we have this at request of President Trump. Israel will suspend declaring sovereignty and focus its efforts for now. It seems to give a little wiggle room there for Israel. It says that we're doing it because of America, not because of the Emirates, but it's the support of the Emirates. So can the Emirates say that they were the ones that caused us to suspend it? Interesting. However, here's a key point. We're going to go to this in depth quickly. Along with the United States, Israel, and the Emirates share a similar outlook regarding the threats and opportunities in the region. Seems like a little bit of a throwaway line. And the most important thing was this stuff at the top. Bilateral agreements, tourism, all this stuff is what it's all about. And by the way, we also share this vision. As set forth in the Vision for Peace, watch this one. All Muslims who come in peace may visit and pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Okay. All Muslims who are coming in peace could do that already. And Jerusalem, and Jerusalem's other holy sites should remain open for peaceful worshipers of all faiths. Whoa. So that means the Al-Aqsa Mosque is not open for people of all faiths. That means the other holy sites are open for everybody, including Jews. Does that include places on the Temple Mount other than the Al-Aqsa Mosque? You can see it's a little bit of a wiggly room here. If you want to take the whole thing, I gave you the link to go and read it. I just gave you a couple excerpts. So what's interesting is you have people reacting. Now, one thing we're going to see about people is, like my friend Paul Simon said, they hear what they want to hear and disregard the rest. You take a look at this document and you read into it, and how you react to it and what you notice and see in the document tells you, remember we were talking about what are you asking for at the Kotel? That tells you who you are. Well, what you see in the document tells you who you are also. So let's jump back and see what some of the responses were. Here's France. The decision to suspend the annexation of Palestinian territories is a positive step. Okay, that's the positive step. Great. Not joint peace plan with Arab country and tourism and economy and vaccines for viruses. No, right? This is what's important. Germany says it's an important contribution to peace in the region. Okay, that's his attitude. Here's our friend, the United Nations. He hopes the deal would help realize a two-state solution. But it's a peace deal between us and the United Arab Emirates. What has it got to do with a peace deal with a two-state solution? What does Trump say? Historic peace agreement between our two great friends, Israel and the United Arab Emirates. All right, that's his attitude. China hopes parties will take action to bring the Palestinian issue back to the track of dialogue and negotiation. Okay, he likes the Palestinians. Trump has a whole different vision of what the world's going to be like. He's not sucked up into this. Israel and Palestinian conflict is the key of unlocking peace in the Middle East. He knows better. We'll see why in a minute. And here's our neighbors, our peace partners. The deal is an aggression against the Palestinian people and a betrayal of their cause. Well, wait a second. We agreed to suspend annexation, which he wanted, right? So why is it an aggression against the Palestinian people and a betrayal to their cause that we're going to have direct flights to Abu Dhabi? Okay. And here's Turkey's reaction. We could suspend diplomatic relations with the Abu Dhabi administration or withdraw our ambassador. He's upset. Wonder whose side he's on and what he's reading into it. And here is our mortal enemy, Iran, we're going to talk about later today. An act of strategic stupidity. Okay, but what's more important? Let's take a look at this one. Netanyahu, what did he say? And I heard him say this in Hebrew. It's always good to listen to the leaders speak in their own language to their own people while the foreign press aren't listening. But he said this immediately after the annexation and the occupied, well, he didn't say the occupied West Bank. This is somebody spinning that. RT World, I think it's an RT wrote, put this out, is still on the table. Annexation is still on the table. We'll never give up our rights to our land. That was a campaign promise he made to the Jewish people during the last election. And here is Zayed, bin Zayed. An agreement was reached with Israel to stop further Israeli annexation of Palestinian territories. So however he's reading it, it gave him enough room to say that he's the one responsible for stopping the annexation. And Netanyahu says, we're only pausing. It's still on the table. All right. Is that pretty well what everybody was understood so far? Is anything that new? It's kind of interesting, right? Two different opinions. So we have a joint statement that everybody's in agreement, but we see they're not really exactly in agreement of all things, but this is politics, right? And we have a peace agreement. Now, just the initial reaction in Israel, the vast majority think it's a good thing. The vast majority of Jewish Israelis think it's a good thing. Do people have a problem from a religious point of view in even acknowledging that you may be willing to, at this time, not annex some of our territories that belong to us? Absolutely. All right. But we're going to have to track that through. So what I want to do is I want to first share the context, because everybody, all those people that we just read, that we met, and who are reacting, and every one of you are reacting from your context. So what I want to do is today, we're going to react from a Torah context. And there's a few principles that I want to lay down as we're going to go through this to understand what the Torah context is. So a few key principles that, and if we have them while we're looking at current events, and current events are just an extension of history, Jewish history. So the more we understand Jewish history and we understand the principles in the Torah, it's going to help us navigate and understand what's going on today. So the first thing I want to mention here is the book of Genesis, the very beginning of the creation story. In the very beginning of the creation story, God creates a garden. He plants Adam and Eve in the garden. And he says, you can eat from all the trees. He says, but of the tree in the middle of the garden, it's so very confusing. God willing, one day we're going to do a deep dive in the whole story. Of the tree of knowledge and good and evil, do not eat. Here it says, lo tochal. You shouldn't eat from it. Because on the day that you eat from it, you will die. All I want to take out from this right now is our sages teach us that when they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and why is it called the knowledge of good and evil? All of a sudden, the whole world was transformed. They themselves were transformed. The whole world was transformed. And everything at that point became a mixture of good and evil. Everything became an admixture of good and evil. And therefore, what's our job? Our job is to become mevararim. We're supposed to be the filters. We're supposed to filter out what's the good and what's the evil, what's the wheat and what's the chaff. That's what living in the world that we live in is all about. There's no stark good and evil. Before they made this mistake, before they brought this mixture of good and evil into the world, everything was clear. In fact, instead of calling it good and evil, it's more like what's true, what's false. What's good? God says it's good. Good means something that helps bring you closer to God. Bad is something that takes you away from God. So you can objectively look at it when it's all just an intellectual observation. You say, well, Is this going to help bring the world closer to God? Is it going to take away from God? It was an intellectual process. Sages say when they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, we got this concept of good and evil. Rabbi Foreman talks about this quite a bit, and he says, when we use the word good, we say, oh, that ice cream was good. It could be bad for us, but we say it's good. There's a part of us, our body, that gets pleasure that's, oh, that was really good. When really, in truth, that's not going to bring you closer to God. It's not going to make you a healthy being that can go out and do great things and bring the world closer to God. But the doubt in the world, my Rosh Hashiva used to call it a counterfeit pleasure. There's the real pleasure, which is connecting with the Almighty and getting closer to the Almighty. And then there's the counterfeits that feel like it, but it's not really. So those of you that are going through this election process in America right now, you have to understand nothing is entirely good and nothing is entirely bad. There are people who want to take that point of view and paint the other side entirely bad and themselves entirely good. Why? Because there's part of them, there's a body part of them, that feels more comfortable and feels good. And since my body feels good, I'm comfortable with this, it must be good. Is it true? No. That's why this fake business, fake news, what Trump has been doing is articulating and saying, people, you have to be careful because there are counterfeits out there that look right, sound right, feel right, that you'll tend to maybe agree with, and it's going to take you down a bad path. So the first principle as we go on today, everything is a mixture of good and bad. Everything. So as soon as you hear a peace deal announced, shouldn't say, is this good for the Jews? Is it bad for the Jews? Is it right? People are going to be, oh, that's horrible. Oh, it's wonderful. No, it's not horrible and wonderful. There's good in it, and there's not good in it. And our job is to figure out which is which, because if you make the Yetzer Hara, our drive, our body drive wants to turn everything into all or nothing. And when it turns everything into all or nothing, it wins. You see it winning in the American elections. The Yetzer Hara, the body drive, wants to turn it into all or nothing. When it's all or nothing, he won, because it's going to distract you from seeking out the truth. What's really going on, and how do you figure that out? By separating out the wheat from the chaff. So that's going to be a principle as we look at this deal. What's the good part of it? And what's the bad part? And if you acknowledge both, you'll be wary and concerned and stay on top of the potential pitfalls as you take advantage of the good stuff to bring God's plan forward. Make sense? Yeah. All righty. Second principle. Everybody thinks that we got to do the right thing and get to the end times, right? End times real fast. So here's another principle. Here we are, Isaiah. He's talking about the final redemption, the end times for the Jewish people. Hakaton yeh la'elef, the little one will become the great one. V'atzeir l'goy atzum, and the younger one will become this mighty nation. He's talking about us, that we will fulfill our potential as a nation. Ani Hashem, I'm God. Be'ita achishena. We mentioned this once before. I am God, in its time I will hasten it. Well, when you make up your mind, is it going to take a long time, or are you going to make it happen fast? Which is it? So Rashi, on the spot, our commentator from the 10th century, says, Be'ita achishena, zachu achishena, lo zachu be'ita. If they merit it, if the Jewish people merit it, if we're all doing all of God's mitzvahs, the entire nation of Israel, the Jewish people, bam, we can have miracles happen. We can have temples falling out of the sky onto the Temple Mount. That's a miracle, but you have to merit that, right? If we don't merit it, it will come in its time through natural means. I would claim the Jewish people don't merit it right now, and therefore the redemption is coming step by step by step by step. So what's my point by mentioning that in terms of our context of looking at this deal? Everything is going to happen step by step by step in a natural way. So don't expect giant leaps, home runs right away. Just don't expect that. Expect step by step by step. This step is going to lead to another step and another step and another step, which will get God's plan fulfilled. Now, the thing that's going to be in contention here is the land. How are we relating to the land, and who does the land belong to? That's what's getting everybody upset, who's upset with part of this deal, by saying we're waiving our right now to annex the land, because we see here in Genesis, Vayamahu karat Hashem et Avraham brit. God made a covenant with Avraham, saying, Lizaracha, to your land, I'm giving you this land. From where? From the Nile River, the Egyptian river, Ad Nahar HaGadol, until the great river, the Nahar Parat, the Euphrates, up until Iraq, in Babylon. Okay, so we're going to have a disagreement about who the land belongs to, and we're going to take a look at that from a biblical perspective and who the players are today and how it's playing out today. Okay. So I mentioned in my teaser that I was here in 1979, 78, 79, when Sadat came, and we signed the peace treaty with Egypt. And that was the beginning. Here's Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat, president of Egypt. Here's Jimmy Carter, still alive. Spoke at the convention yesterday, I think, right? At any rate, they shook hands, and Begin agreed to give to Sadat the Sinai Peninsula that we had captured from Egypt, which had the oil fields. It was strategic because it had the oil fields in it. And Sadat, I was a little bit wary about this, because who was this person? In the 25 years up until this day, there were 4 wars of basic annihilation. One of them, the 73 Yom Kippur War, he was the president. He initiated it on our holiest day of the year, hoping to sort of wipe us out while the maximum number of soldiers were on leave. Didn't turn out that way. He was humiliated, and we took back everything and more. And he decided eventually, you know what? Maybe he can get it back through peace, what he couldn't get back by trying to go against the God of Israel in this nation of Israel, where God made these miracles happen for us that we won. Shouldn't have won. All right. So that happened. What happened a couple years later? Sadat was assassinated by who? Khalid Islambuli, somebody in his own army who was a member of the Islamic Jihad, who was an Al-Qaeda affiliate, at a military parade celebrating what? The victory of the Yom Kippur War. Talk about reframing and seeing things from your own point of view. He was at a victory parade celebrating his victory of the Yom Kippur War, and he was assassinated by somebody from his own army. However, what was said at the time? What did Begin say at the time? Since we know we have people here who are trying to annihilate us in 4 wars, if we can stop war for 20 years, it's worth it. Partially because the Sinai Peninsula wasn't part of biblical Israel, right? We didn't give back biblical Israel. So, and in fact, what did happen? No wars for 40 years with Egypt, who was our most formidable enemy, the biggest power at the time. So was it worth it? Was it worth it? In the long run, we have a principle in halacha, in Jewish law. We know there are certain things we can't transgress. We have to be willing to die for it. We talked about them. If somebody says murder somebody else, you're not allowed to murder them. You have to be willing to die rather than transgress that commandment. Do not murder. There are others that if you're going to be able to save somebody's life, it gets put aside. You put aside the laws of Shabbat in order to go deliver a baby, right? If somebody's about to give birth or they need to go to the hospital, you put the laws of Shabbat. You put aside the laws of Shabbat. If you can, you know that you are going to save Jewish lives, even though you're supposed to protect the land as a heritage to pass down to the generations. It belongs to the nation of Israel. There is room within halacha to temporarily give up some of the land in order to save Jewish lives, if you're guaranteed that's going to be the case. All right. Along came the Oslo Accords. Here we have Yitzhak Rabin, Yassir Arafat, head of the PLO, the greatest terrorist in our modern era, and King Hussein of Jordan applauding happily. This is the signing of the Oslo II Accords. The principle of that was we give them land and we get peace. But at this point, they were offering to give Gaza and Jericho first. Jericho is certainly a part of biblical Israel. Gaza actually is part of biblical Israel. And the idea was land for peace, give the Palestinians an area for autonomy, but to negotiate the final status, they were afraid to say give them a state because we didn't want them to have another armed terrorist state on our borders. But ideally, they thought, okay, land for peace. Vast majority were against it, right? I wrote a book about it, the Jerusalem Conspiracy. You can read it about the events of what happened. The religious right wing were against it. The secular Israelis thought that the religious right were against it because the land was holier than the saving lives. It's not true. That was a blood libel, and that's one of the reasons why I wrote my book. The reason why the religious and the right wing were against it is because they said, if you give land next door to Jewish settlement to the arch enemies, the greatest terrorists and murderers of Jews in the modern era, with a stated constitution to destroy the state of Israel, and you give them land and 40,000 automatic weapons, semi-automatic weapons, Jews are going to die. This agreement is insane. You do not bring the greatest terrorists in the world from exile and bring them next door and give them 40,000 guns, let alone what they're going to smuggle and build on their own. Jews are going to die. That's why we were against it. Okay? And lo and behold, what happened? Here we go. Here's the Sbarro Pizzeria. After the signing, over 1,000 Jewish Israelis were murdered by Palestinian terrorists. And here, my cousins, there's 5 of them, Mordechai, Tzira, Raya, Avram Yitzchak, and Chemda Schaives-Chuder. Their family is a cousin from Amsterdam, from my, and they left a lot of orphans. So that was in this attack right in the main corner of Jerusalem, Sbarro Pizzeria. And that's not the only one. I have friends here from Toronto. I don't know if Richard and, did you know Scotty Goldberg? No? Did you know Scotty Goldberg? So I had a friend, Scott Goldberg, Yechezkel Goldberg. He also was from Toronto, made Aliyah. Good friend of mine. Was blown up on an 18 bus after Oslo was signed. When I had the Jerusalem Conspiracy book sold to Steinmatzky's, the buyer, fiction buyer at Steinmatzky's Books, who bought my book to distribute in Israel, her sister was blown up on a different 18 bus. I worked with an architect friend whose wife and mother-in-law were killed in Dizengoff Center on Purim in a bombing attack, meaning it was personal. It's a small country. You know, you have 6 degrees of separation in the world. Here you got 1, maybe 2. So we all understood what it was. Was it worth it? I don't think so, personally. Was the Egyptian one worth it? I think so, personally. Here's the next one. You know, when that was failing, the whole thing was falling apart. Rabin was about to cancel the whole deal when he was assassinated. Before that, he needed to save face. They were grasping at straws. So we had been propping up the Jordanian kingdom for years. And he was totally dependent upon us because he's a minority in a Palestinian majority country. Jordan is a Palestinian majority country. And they have a Bedouin king from Saudi Arabia who's ruling over them as a minority. We kept him propped up. He needed the Israelis. We had lots of deals going on with them for all those years. It was a cold peace, but they decided they needed a photo op to rescue the peace accords from the Israeli side. And we gave them land, some land, and we gave them 400 million cubic meters of water a year out of the Kinneret, which was a stupid idea. But we did it, and we still do to this day. And the reason why the Kinneret kept dropping every year was basically because of all of that water that we were giving them. So thank God, God loves us, and he filled it up for us, including that. So here's, so just to give you an example, it was less. One of the places was up here in the Galilee called Peace Island. It extended as a piece that they wanted back. We gave it back. There's a tower there, Soldier Tower, right on the border. And school trips used to come and visit there. And here is King Hussein visiting one of my niece's friends' families. There were 6 girls and their teacher who were shot by a Jordanian soldier from that place we gave back to them from the turret while they were on their school trip enjoying nature. These little schoolgirls, and my niece was traumatized by it because it was her friends. So he came, he was like worried that the whole thing was going to blow up. So he came and shook the hands of all the mourners. All right. The everybody was supposed to open up tourism and all kind of things. You know what? The Jordanian Dental Association, don't forget, the vast majority of Jordanians are Palestinians. The Jordanian Dental Association said if you treat an Israeli tourist and fix their teeth, you lose your license to practice dentistry. That's the kind of peace we have with them on a day-to-day basis. People go to Petra to go and see Petra. Okay, there's a certain amount of tourism, but it's a cold peace, just like it's a cold peace with Egypt. Is that better than war? Yes, it's better than war. All right, so now we come to the Abraham Accords, which were grandiosely, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know if I had the, let me just share this. Here's the picture of King Hussein signing. And here is a picture of King Hussein being Menachem Avel. He's comforting, consoling the mourners, visiting them in the Shiva house in Beit Shemesh. So now we have this deal, right? The new deal, the Abraham Accords, the Avraham Accords, the Ibrahim Accords. It's called Ibrahim, Avraham, Abraham, English, Arabic, Hebrew. Big breakthrough? It is a big breakthrough. Have we been having cold peace and sharing of intelligence and business going on between us and Abu Dhabi? And yes, it's been going on for years. Did you have direct flights? No. Actually, I would put up a picture of a friend of mine. He's in a hotel in Abu Dhabi, I can't remember where, and he's got this whole Arab get-up, everything in the hotel, standing smiling. He's got his talis bag, he's got his tefillin, he's on his way to go and pray. So Jews have been going, Orthodox Jews have been going. We've had this cold peace sharing of intelligence, basically got formalized, and there'll be some added benefits. Something strange about this picture, right? Anybody notice something strange about this picture? Yeah? Anybody notice anything strange about this picture? This is pretty awesome. Here's President Trump. And there was a big team. This is the core of the team. Who have we got over here? The 2 main players are Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, who's an Orthodox Jew. a practicing Orthodox Shomer Shabbos Jew. And who's the other main architect? Avi Berkowitz, who's a friend of his from the old days, who's a practicing, keep-a-wearing Orthodox Jew. And who's this? The next important person, David Friedman. And who's he? The American ambassador to Israel, who's a key player in negotiating this deal. And who's he? A practicing Orthodox Jew. Here's Steve Mnuchin. He's Jewish, and he's proudly Jewish, and but he's not so practicing. And here's President Trump, who has Orthodox daughter and an Orthodox grandchildren. These are the guys that constructed the deal with United Arab Emirates. That's kind of weird. That is weird. Now, if that doesn't get your attention and doesn't tell you that something is going on here, I don't know. All right. What does Al Jazeera say, though? What does Al Jazeera say, and how did they negotiate this deal? How did they know how to negotiate this deal? And I'm going to show you the secret that got slipped by in the joint statement. Here's Al Jazeera. Israel normalized ties to keep U.S. militarily engaged in the Middle East. This is person's name, Trita Parsi. Parsi means Persia. That's Iran, right? So this person knows what's going on in Iran, and he understands what's going on in the Middle East. He's the executive vice president of the Quincy Institute, and the main aim of the decision to normalize ties was to keep Washington militarily engaged in the region. The Iran expert made the comment when asked about what the deal might mean for Tehran and what role the alleged threat from Israel and the U.S.'s arch-foe played in the historic agreement. Parsi, noting the close business ties between Abu Dhabi and Tehran, said the alliance between Israel, UAE, and Saudi Arabia is more about the fact that they are terrified of the idea of the United States leaving the Middle East. Because remember, what's Trump's mantra? America first. Get all the soldiers back. Bring them back from Syria. Bring them back from Afghanistan. All the soldiers are coming back. No boots on the ground. Right? No boots on the ground. Now, if you're in the Middle East and you know that Iran is your mortal enemy, and Trump is saying there's going to be no boots on the ground, what do? Well, who's got the most powerful, well-trained, expert enemy knowing how to blow up nuclear reactors? Who? So if the Americans pull out, who's left to take care of the Iranians? Especially if we've got American support. Americans will support us to the hilt to deal with the problem, but Trump's mandate is no American troops. That's what's really going on, people. So if we're going to get guarantees, and we're part of the coalition this time, as opposed to during the first Gulf War, when we were forced to sit and take 39 Scud missiles rather than send up our pilots and blow up the rocket launchers in Western Iraq. That was kind of horrible. Now they realize because America's not going to do the bombing, they have to let us into the coalition compared to what happened in the first Gulf War. All right, now I'm going to show it to you graphically, what's really going on. Here we go. This is a Sunni map. The Muslim world is divided into Sunnis, the majority, and the Shia, the Shiites, smaller group, right? The vast majority of Muslims in the world are Sunni Muslims. So who are Egypt and Jordan? They're our first peace partners, Sunni. Now we've got UAE. Now we've got Saudi Arabia unofficially. Well, the first thing they did is let us do the flyover now. We've had unofficial ties with Saudi Arabia for a long time. Who's our mortal enemy? Over here, Iran. Iran is Shia. right? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to switch now to the Shia map. This is just showing you the Sunnis, okay? Here's the Shia map. Whoa. 90 to 95% of Iranian Muslims are Shia. In Iraq, it's 65 to 70% are Shia. This is why there's so much problems in Iraq. 65, 70% Shia, and then the rest are Sunni, right? See, it's not as dark colored here. So the dividing line comes through here. What is Iran's goal? To create a crescent from the sea to the sea. That's why they've been working and supporting all of Hezbollah, who are Shia, in Lebanon, empowering them, having Hezbollah forces come into Syria during their civil war to gain territory. Why were they so against ISIS, Iran? Because ISIS is from Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is Sunni, Wahhabi, extremist. Saudi Arabia is the birthplace of Wahhabi, and that was Al-Qaeda, bin Laden, the bin Laden family. Who was the inheritor of Al-Qaeda? Al-Baghdadi, ISIS, which was Sunni, right? The Sunnis were empowered by the Americans, al-Baghdadi, to go fight in Syria against the Shia forces. You ended up creating a monster temporarily that created their own caliphate, Sunni, in the face of the Iranians, who don't want Sunni caliphates here. They want all Shia. And now we understand Yemen, what's going on in Yemen with the Houthis, who are Shia, who are causing problems for the Saudis, because now they're going to try to sandwich Saudi Arabia. That's what's going on here. Same problem in Oman, has a mix. So the battle lines are being set up. Anybody that tells you that the key to peace in the Middle East is Israel and the Palestinians, no. If there were no Israel, this is the problem in the Middle East. Who's going to take dominance over the Muslim world? Iran, who are not Arabs, the Shia, or the Sunni Arabs, who are going to control the whole area, right? And this is the war. Iran and Iraq had an 8-year war. Has nothing to do with us. The only thing that we're useful for them, is in this war. That's why they want us. They don't love us. In fact, if we had time, we'd talk about Dar al-Islam, any place that came under Islamic political control. If an infidel, us, takes control, it's intolerable, and you have to go on jihad to liberate it from the infidel. We're allowed to exist as a second-class citizen, but you can't exist as the Ribon, as the authority. And therefore, ultimately, Israel has to come under Muslim control, whether you're Shia or you're Sunni. Doesn't really matter. All right. So that's really what's going on. Now, I want to share with you something that I discovered doing my research. This is from Ambassador Gingrich. Newt Gingrich's wife is the ambassador to the Vatican, to the Holy See, they call it. And then this is back in January, the Abrahamic Faiths Initiative. On January 14th, she was honored to host the opening session of this initiative at her house in Rome. Discussions among the faith leaders to advance peace and mutual respect around the world. They convened 25 senior global religious leaders representing a range of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim communities for a 2-day working dialogue at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. She commends the statement released today by the participants, which endorses their commitment to resolutely declare that religions must never incite war, hateful attitudes, hostility, and extremism, nor must they incite violence or the shedding of blood, said the document on human fraternity. Now, when he talks about Jewish leaders, there's this Rabbi Saperstein, who's a Reform rabbi. We haven't had a chance to talk about all the different factions within Judaism, Jewish people. The chief rabbi of Rome, I think, may have been there, but he has to go. He's Orthodox. But here's an interesting picture. The United Arab Emirates religious official meets Pope Francis in the Vatican during this conference earlier this year. The Imam, who's the president for promoting peace in Muslim societies, was in Rome for the Abrahamic Faiths Initiative. At the meeting were all these different people. Pope Francis, the leader of the church, had boosted ties in the Muslim world because he came to visit the United Arab Emirates last year. It was also announced that a mosque, church, and synagogue were to be built in Abu Dhabi to symbolize the growing ties between the religions in the Emirates. The Abrahamic family house, designed by the renowned British architect, is to be built in Saadiyat Island. Islam, Christianity, and Judaism are the three main Abrahamic religions because Abraham, or Ibrahim, is important to them all. Adherents consider him an important prophet or a father figure. And here's what's being built, people. This looks like the Kube, right? We'll see it in a minute. This is the mosque. I think this is the church, and I believe this is the synagogue. I took a look because they have, you can do an indoor view of what these things look like. Doesn't look like my Orthodox synagogue where there's a separation between the women's section and the men's section. So, cool. Just want to stop the share for a minute and say, how many people knew about that? Anybody hear about that? Abrahamic Faiths Initiative, bringing the three faiths together, Christianity, the Catholic Church, and Islam, and Jews, and synagogues, and churches, and we're all the same. Abraham, Abraham, Abraham. We're all equal. Anybody hear that? In the United Arab Emirates, people. Wow. How many think that's a good idea? All right. So let's go back to our chart. I made a little chart for you. Those of you that have printed it out have had a chance to see it. Let's just do a quick review about who's whom. Abraham's descendants. Remember, we had the covenant of Abraham, but it's the covenant of Abraham. At the beginning, it says, Abraham Zaracha, your descendants will get the land from the Euphrates to the Nile. Doesn't indicate whom, right? But we do know, we're going to see in the Torah that the explicit promise is made to Abraham, and then the explicit promise is made to Isaac, and then the explicit promise is made to Jacob, Israel, in the Torah. We're going to see that in a minute. But who are the other players of the Abrahamic faiths, right? Okay, so here's Abraham. He's married to Sarah, but Sarah can't have children. She's barren. Sarah says, take Hagar. Take Hagar, who's my handmaiden, and have a child with her, and I'll raise him as if he's my own. So she does that. Who's Hagar? You know who Hagar is? She was, when they left Egypt, Sarah and Abraham were in Egypt during the famine. When they left Egypt, Hagar came with them. Hagar was the princess in Egypt. She was an Egyptian princess. She says, better I should be a slave to Abraham's house, how great he is, than to be a princess in Egypt. So she's Egyptian, people. They have a child named Ishmael. He's born first, but Abraham is told that Sarah is going to get pregnant and have a child, and that the covenant will be fulfilled through Isaac. We'll see that in a second. So that's Yitzchak. Yitzchak marries Rivka. We saw him last week when we talked about loving God. So they have twins, Esav and Jacob. And the covenant is explicitly given to Isaac and to Jacob. Israel who becomes the nation of Israel, Judaism, the land of Israel. That's it. Who does Yishmael become? And they say themselves, they call themselves Yishmaelim, Ismailia in Egypt. They directly find they say Yishmael is their direct ancestor, right? That's the Arabs, the Arab nations claim direct descendants from Yishmael, who was the son of Abraham. And their religion is Islam. It's divided into two. Not all Muslims are Arabs, but not all Arabs are Muslims. There's Christian Arabs as well. But the vast majority of Arabs, their religion is Islam. And they are Middle Eastern. We're in Israel. And who does Esav? Esav is called Edom. Edom, we can see lots of sources to show how that became Rome, right? Herod was an Edomite. We're going to see some sources in a minute. That's Rome, which became Christianity and represents the West. So we got the West, the East, us stuck here in the middle, and we're connected here, but everybody has their descendancy from Ishmael. Ishmael, Sarah says, he's not going to inherit with her son, and he gets sent away. He's cast away, even though he was born first and wants to claim firstborn rights. He wants to have the covenant given to Abraham. Esav sold his birthright, which was to be the leader in Israel of the land. He sold it, and along went the blessings with it to Jacob, who had to do it in a way to his father well, we'll spend some time talking about that one day. But the brachas were already his when he sold his birthright, and he got the blessings for the land, and God explicitly says it's to him. But he was the older one. He was the firstborn, and he got sent away to Mount Seir and ultimately ends up in Rome. And maybe he wants to take back the covenant given to Abraham. All right, let's just take a look here. Let's quickly at the text. So God says, just quickly go through it because we're going to run out of time, right? You'll have a son, Isaac, and I'm going to give the covenant through him. As for Ishmael, okay, I know you like him. I'm going to bless him. I'm going to make him fertile, numerous, and he's going to be the father of 12 chieftains, and I'm going to make it a great nation. But my covenant I will maintain with Isaac, who Sarah will bear with you at this time next year. Now, I just went to get my car fixed. I needed to put in the air filter, and I got to the garage, and the mechanic, Yusuf, wasn't there. Why? Because it was the Eid al-Adha, just happened. It's called the Feast of the Sacrifice. Anybody know about the Feast of the Sacrifice? You heard about it? Eid al-Fitr. There's two main ones, the ending of Ramadan and this one. Two main feasts on the Muslim calendar. You never heard of this one, right? Just happened. Okay. So what are they celebrating? What's the feast all about? And this is the Kuba. Why did they come to the Kuba? Because this is where it took place. And here we have, I took this from Wikipedia. One of the main trials of Abraham's life was to face the command of God by sacrificing his beloved son. In Islam, Abraham kept having dreams that he was sacrificing his son Ishmael. Whoa. Right? So he says to Ishmael, I keep dreaming I'm slaughtering you. And Ishmael says, no problem. Do what you're supposed to do, Dad. I'm willing to be sacrificed and slaughtered. Right? And then the Satan tries to stop him from doing it, but Avram, throws the Satan away by throwing stones at them. So they have this thing about throwing stones at the Hajj. And since Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son, the angel Gabriel called out to him and says, Abraham, no. I see you're willing to do it. And a lamb from heaven was given by Gabriel to Abraham to slaughter instead of Ishmael. Where did all this happen? At the Kuba in Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Not at the Temple Mount. Not in Jerusalem. In Mecca. The binding and sacrificing of Ishmael took place here. And Islam believes that God gave Torah at the Sinai and that the Torah is holy and from God. Here's the exact verses from the Quran if you want to read them. But here is Genesis, right? Take your son, your favorite one, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, Har Moriah, which we know where it is. It's where the temple stood, and offer him there as a burnt offering. Right? Here's the whole story. You know this story. I put it in here. You can read it later. And then the angel says, Abraham, Abraham. Oh, that sounds like I heard over there in the Quran. Don't kill him. I see. I can trust you. And then Abraham looked up, and guess what? There's the ram. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up instead of his son. And he called the place Hashem Yira'eh. God appeared here. And that's where we get the word Yerushalayim. Hashem Yira'eh. That's what Abraham called it. Yira'eh will appear. And Melchizedek called it, he was the king of Shalem. So when you combine Yira'eh Shalem, you get Yirah Shalem. Yerushalayim. That's where the name comes from, these two stories. All right. No, but it's in Mecca. It's at the Kuba, and it was really Ishmael. And all of these people, the entire Muslim world, are celebrating that. Okay. Here we have the story about Esav. Let's deal with Esav now. Esav complains, and he says, after Jacob got the blessing. And Isaac says to him, but wait, I made your brother Jacob master over you. I've given him and all of his brothers, I gave to him all of his brothers for servants, meaning including you, Esav. You're ultimately going to have to serve Jacob, Israel. So what can I do for you? So Esav says, no, you only got one blessing. Bless me too. So, and his father Isaac answered, and he said to him, Hine mishma'nei haaretz, from the fat of the land, moshavecha. Your dwelling place will be from the fat of the land, and mitala shamayim me'al, and from the dew of the heavens above. Right? This is his blessing. It's pretty cryptic. After that, he tells him also, you're going to live by your sword, and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restive, you shall break his yoke from your neck. Meaning, when Israel is down, he's up. Rome is up. And when Rome is down, we're up. It's a mutually exclusive thing. So when we mess up, it gives room for Esav to do what he wants, which is ultimately take back the blessing. Right? Why? Because he says, you know what? I'm going to let the mourning period take place, right? After my father dies and I finish mourning him, I'm going to kill him. And if I kill him, then I inherit the land and the blessings and everything. So we see that Esav's plan, Edom, Rome, is to take back control of the land. And we see that Ishmael's plan is to ultimately take back control of the land when we don't merit it. All right. And so what does Rashi say here? Mishmanei haaretz. What does it mean from the fat of the land? Well, this is a cryptic blessing. Zu Italia shel Yavan. He's saying this in the 10th century, people. In the 10th century, Rashi is explaining to us, quoting from the Talmud, going back 1,000 years, from a contemporary at the time, in the early first century. When he gives them the blessing of the fatness of the earth, he's talking about the part of Italy that was part of Greece. All right. Edom is Rome. Esav is Rome. Here we have the explicit covenant with Jacob, Israel. May he grant the blessing of Abraham to you and your offspring, that you may possess the land where you're sojourning, which God has assigned to Abraham. Then he went off to get a wife. And what does Esav do, right? Isaac says, do not marry a girl from the local girls. So what did Esav do? Esav went to Ishmael, who was in Egypt, and took a wife in addition to the wives he had. So we see that from the very beginning, there was this confederation and marriage, intermarrying between Esav and Yishmael. They both have a common goal, which is to take away the blessing from Jacob. Now, Jacob, when he runs away from his brother, he's on his way because he wants to kill him. He lies down, tradition says the Temple Mount, and then he sees the ladder with the angels going up and down, right? And God tells him the land you're lying on is holy. I'm going to give it to you and your offspring, and all of the families of the earth will be blessed through you. Remember, I'm with you. I'll protect you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I've done what I promised. What about these angels ascending and descending? They're the nations who conquered Israel. Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer, commentaries say, what is this cryptic dream of the angels going up and down? There are a number of understandings for it. One of them is this: these are the princes of the nations which God showed Jacob our father, the nations that are going to send us into exile and take over the land temporarily. Babylon, he ascended 70 steps, 70 years, and then descended. And then Media, Persia and Media, Iran, 52, goes up 52 years, then descends. Then comes along the Greek exile, 100 steps, and then comes down. And then Edom, Esav, Rome, the Roman exile, ascended, and nobody knows how many. Didn't come down. Whoa, so in that hour, Jacob was afraid. He freaked out during the dream. Wait a second, maybe he's going up. Esav, Rome is going to ascend, and he'll never come down, which will mean we'll never come back to the land. He was freaking out that the exile, the Roman exile, would never end. It's 2,000 years, right, people? So he says, even though you see him, so to speak, ascend and sit by me, meaning seems the Roman Empire is the ultimate. I will bring him down. I will end this Roman exile that we were still in to this day. Now, I was watching sorry, I'm going over a couple minutes, but just need a couple more minutes and we'll wrap up. I was watching some very popular Israeli commentator who happens to be messianic, and they're like focusing on prophecy and prophecy and prophecy. But I'm telling you, people, it's not so much about the prophecies details, because we don't know the details until well after they happen. It's about understanding the principles, like God says. God doesn't give him the details in understanding that dream. He says, don't worry. The principle is it's not going to last forever. The Roman exile will end. Details, years, how many, that's not the issue. The issue is to keep us going and not retreating from our ultimate mission and trying to strive forward for it. So he said, no. They're arguing about, is it Yeshayahu, the prophecy? He says, no, it's not Yeshayahu, it's Daniel. No. So I want to bring up Daniel, right? Because our prophecy in Daniel, what our sages say about Daniel, is going to be similar to what we saw on the ladder, and it's going to give us some insight. Let's come back to this, and we'll finish up in 1 minute, and I'll stick around for questions. Here's Daniel, 2nd chapter, right? There's this crazy image of this person, this creature. The head was of fine silver. The head was of gold. Its breasts and its 2 arms were of silver. Its belly and thighs were of bronze, and its legs were of iron, and the feet part iron and part clay. We don't have time to go into it in detail, but it tells us the gold represents Babylon. That's Iraq. The silver represents Persia and Media, who inherited the Babylonian Empire, right? Which ends up being the Purim story here. Who conquers the Persians? The Greeks. They're the bronze. And the Greeks ends up becoming the Hanukkah story, and the Hasmoneans take over. But along comes who takes over the Greek Empire? The iron is, and the iron is representative of weapons, hard metal for the sword, right? He's going to live by his sword. That's Edom, Esav, Rome, which ultimately became the Christian world when it divided into the 2 empires, the Eastern and Western Orthodox Church, the Vatican, and Constantinople. And then who's the clay? There's differing opinions, but the majority is that the clay is Yishmael, the Arabs, and Islam. It says at the end of days, the long Rome exile will meld into and continue into a Yishmael exile, which is going to be the harshest and the most terrible exile, so that there will be Edom and Yishmael working together, ultimately to try to take Jerusalem away from us, because that's what it's all about. It's all about Jerusalem. And that will be the end of the exile, and ultimately they will fail, and we will succeed. So, just quickly to summarize and take a look at our deal here. The weird part of the deal is this Abraham business, right? That we have to separate ourselves from at all cost. We have to, you see that within the Arab world, they understand that they're even holier and more committed to Abraham. They pray 5 times a day. We only pray 3 times a day, the Jewish people. Right? They're more committed to Ibrahim, Nabi Ibrahim, than we are. So they feel that they deserve to have the land. That's why they don't even want us up on the Temple Mount to pray. The deal we signed said, no, all faiths are allowed to pray up there. Right now, we're not allowed to pray up there. Can you imagine? The Jewish people are not allowed to pray on the Temple Mount because the Ishmaelim say so. Because Moshe Dayan in 1967 gave the keys to the Waqf, the Islamic Trust in Jordan, to control. Why did the Christian church, the Catholic Church, recognize the state of Israel in 1993? And up until 1993, from 1948 till 1993, the Catholic Church did not recognize the state of Israel. Were you aware of that? Did anybody know they didn't recognize the state of Israel? You did, Sylvie, right. But miraculously, in 1993, after the Oslo Accords were signed, the Pope recognized the state of Israel. You know why? Because when Rabin left the White House lawn, instead of coming directly back to Israel, he stopped off in the Vatican to meet the Pope. And you know what he did? He gave the Pope a letter. And you know what the letter said? The letter said, even though Jerusalem is a final status issue, here's what we're thinking, Pope. We're going to internationalize the city, turn it into the old city, turn it into 4 cantons. Jewish canton, Christian, Muslim, right? And the Temple Mount itself will be international territory, but somebody's going to have to police it. So, you know, Pope, you got your funny guys with those Michelangelo pantaloons, the funny costume, the Vatican police. Those guys are going to be up on the Temple Mount policing. And you know what the Pope said? That kind of state of Israel I can recognize. If you, the Jewish people, are abdicating your rights to the Temple Mount, which therefore means you're never going to rebuild the temple, that's the kind of Jewish people, as state of Israel, I can accept. Now, this current Pope is saying, yeah, we're all the same. We're all at the same level. Islam, Catholics, Jews, right? That's the part we have to watch out for. Do we want to have business? Do we want to have tourism? Do we want to have a cascade of Arab nations making peace with us? Yeah. You know why? Because it changes your mind. And when your business vestments are there, the tendency to want to kill yourself, your own business deal, becomes farther remote. So understanding it's a step-by-step process to bring it to the Geula. What are we ultimately going to have to do? We're going to ultimately have to explain to them, and they're going to have to agree that this story about Isaac and Ishmael is about Isaac and not Ishmael. We're going to have to explain to them when God gives us a contract over the land, we've got a contract, and it's God, the same God that you're praying to 5 times a day. Let's read it together inside, people. We're going to have to do the same thing with the Pope. So step by step, step by step. So when you see a deal, you know there's going to be some bad in it, and you know there's going to be the good in it. So the good in it is if we have more and more Arabs uniting to help defeat Iran when the Americans don't want to fight, we can fly and blow up nuclear reactors with the Saudi airplanes and the UAE airplanes, right? Let's fight together because we're going to have to fight them to avoid the genocide. So that's at the level, because again, we can't expect open miracles. We have to bring the redemption step by step. So the greatest enemy in the Islamic world is the non-Arabs, which is the Iranians. We have to stop them while you're doing the good stuff and the teaching. You know, I always say, when a lion comes to your front door and you open up the door and you see there's a lion there, there's something going on here. There's a message. You better do tshuva, you better repent, you better change your ways, become a better person, because something's happening. But while you're repenting and reflecting and working on yourself, shut the door, right? Derech hateva, you got to shut the door. So even though we have to work spiritually, step by step, while we're doing that, you can't ignore the practical side of going towards the next step. Will the next step help us towards this goal? Well, if we don't give in on this Abrahamic 3-church mosque synagogue thing, right, that'll just embolden them. But to do trade and find vaccines and solutions and research and economic empowerment and get rid of poverty and lift people up, absolutely. Because that's part of God's plan. God doesn't want disease in the world. God wants everybody to be happy. God wants, right? That's going to help. And if we can help do that, we'll get more attention from them, that they'll want to listen to what they have to say. They want to listen to what we have to say about Startup Nation. That's part of this deal. You get it? So the more that we can offer them in helping them achieve their goals that don't include destroying us and taking away Jerusalem, the better it's going to be. You know why? Because, hey, that was pretty good. You know what you're talking about there? Maybe I'll sit down and listen to you about the story about Abraham and who he was binding where. That's my understanding of the deal. Meaning, do I totally understand what's going on? No, but I understand. You have to look at a situation and separate the good from the bad and see, net, is it better to go with this or is it bad to go with this? The net deal with Arafat and the terrorists, it netted out, no. The deal with Jordan, netted out, maybe. Egypt, definitely. This, definitely. That's my opinion in terms of trying to net it out. That's your job. Each and every one of you have to figure it out. But just don't reactionary say, oh, this goes against a principle. There's a whole broad spectrum of principles that we have to balance in this equation to come to our conclusion what's good or what's not. The one thing we can trust is that verse that we read, that God will never abandon Israel. God's with us till the end to help us get there, whether we deserve it, whether we don't do it. And the only decision we have to make is, do I want to be part of the solution or do I want to be part of the problem? And that's my blessing for all of you, that you use your wisdom and not your emotions to figure out what makes more sense in terms of what God wants to happen in the world. Take a big picture attitude and do what you can to first influence yourself and then influence the people around you. So thank you very much. And we should all pray that we see peace in the whole world very soon.